So, welcome to this next Trachtenberg School alumni panel on building bridges, driving change, career paths, and advocacy. I am thrilled to have four alumni with us today to be able to share their insights about what this means to have a career in advocacy. I am just thrilled to be able to hear from each of you because people are coming from very, very different backgrounds. So, we're going to start with introductions from all of our panelists. And after the introductions, to remind our attendees, please feel free. You can be able to ask questions yourself by raising your hand, or at any point you can type in your questions into the chat box and we will ask questions that way. So I'm going to ask Allison, you're first on my screen, to ask you to just share a little bit more about your career path and your current work, and to start us off.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Allison Friedman Phillips. I'm the Director of Programs, Policy, and Advocacy at the Women's Foundation of Colorado. So I have been in this particular role for almost 11 years in June. I actually came to this job right after I finished Trachtenberg in 2014. So I can't believe it's been 10 years since I was in DC and finishing the program. But in terms of like my career trajectory, I have always worked in the nonprofit sector. I started as a community organizer in the 2008 election cycle, and then I worked at a community foundation on the West Slope of Colorado for 4 years, and then I moved out to DC to be at Trachtenberg and did the Master of Public Policy program there. And then in terms of my role at the Women's Foundation and how it's really evolved to support the advocacy work that we do as a foundation, I started in managing some of our grants that we give here at the foundation. And then over time, as our organization got more engaged in policy and advocacy as an entity, I worked on building out that program, partnering and making grants to organizations to engage in advocacy, and then also building out the advocacy work, that we do at the Women's Foundation. And we focus on a lot of different issues that really at the intersection of advancing gender, racial, and economic equity. So things like childcare and early childhood, equal pay, paid family leave, livable wages, and things like that. So I am excited to be here with you all today and happy to answer questions, but hopefully that was a good overview. But yeah, can share more if that would be helpful too.
Fantastic. Thank you. Next on my screen is Omanigo. We're going to have you share next. We're coming in from Chicago now.
Thank you very much, Denise. Hello, everyone. I'm Amanago Ufamada, and I'm currently the Director of State Advocacy at the American Academy of Pediatrics. I've been in that role now for about almost 5 years, and I serve as lead for a department that supports our members to advance child health issues at the state level. We are also one half of an advocacy team that lives in and works out of our Washington, D.C. office, and they conduct our federal advocacy portfolio. But prior to moving out to Illinois and working and living here in Chicago, I lived in D.C. for 18 years. And so I've served in roles at the House of Representatives. I served for almost 3 years for a Georgia member. Also worked at the House Ways and Means Committee. I've also worked on K Street at private lobbying firms. I've worked in global health with an AIDS foundation, and also in DC government. And so I had a little bit of state local experience from there, and now currently at the AAP. And I am the class of 2006. I don't know if I should say that. It was before we were even Trachtenberg, so I don't even know how to say that. Like, we were just SPPA back then, but it's a whole new name now. But yeah, I had a wonderful experience at GW, and so I'm really happy to be here on this panel and share some of my experience. And I'll just keep it there. And just to also add that any opinions shared today are those are mine, and they're not of my employer or that of my organization.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I don't even want to tell you when I got my master's in public policy. It'll make you feel young. John, we're going to pivot over to you.
Thank you, Denise. Hi, everyone. John Perino. I'm at the Internet Society. We're a global nonprofit. We work on a variety of internet policy issues, but we were founded by essentially the creators of the internet. So our focus is on making sure that people get access to the internet around the world. About a third of the world is still unconnected. So a lot of my colleagues do very technical work, and I just write and talk for a living. So my title is a bit unique. It's a senior policy and advocacy expert. Essentially, that means I'm our lead in Washington, D.C. for policy and advocacy work. So some of that is direct engagement with congressional offices and government agencies. And then a lot of our work is more general public-facing advocacy communications on our different issue areas. My background before this, I've actually only been in this position for it's been under a year. So my background before going to Trachtenberg was in communications. I studied political communication previously at George Washington University. So two-time alum. And what I really wanted to do with my Trachtenberg degree is bridge communications and supporting advocacy communications in the background with doing some more front-facing policy analysis and direct engagement. So that's my prior roles are at a public affairs firm in Washington, D.C., and in communications director roles. I've since kind of transitioned. My prior work before joining the Internet Society was at something called the Stanford Internet Observatory, where I was a policy analyst. So that was tracking policy developments, responding to calls for requests for comment, providing briefings to policymakers around the world, but in particular Congress. So that's kind of the evolution of my work is kind of shifting from communications and supporting subject matter experts to kind of becoming a bit more front-facing, doing media interviews, doing that direct engagement. So I'm really excited to be doing a bit more about that and staying in the internet policy field at the Internet Society.
Fantastic. And now we'll bring it to Amanda. And once this is over, the introductions, please remember you can type in questions or ask questions yourself. So be ready.
Great. Thanks so much, Denise, and thanks for inviting me to join this panel today. So I'm Amanda Roach. I work with the Pharmaceutical Research and Manufacturers of America, or PhRMA, and we are a trade association based here in Washington, D.C. We represent some of the biggest U.S.-based innovative pharmaceutical companies. And I've been with PhRMA for just almost 5 years. It'll be 5 years in June. I actually started my career, I have a background in chemistry and biology, and I started at Dow Chemical Company. And then from there, I moved from Michigan to DC about 14 years ago. And I actually got a position with the US FDA, and I was with the US FDA for about 8 years. My career path was a little bit interesting. I started working in sort of a process improvement area within the US FDA, focused on various compliance functions, but also aspects related to the pharmaceutical review process, strictly from a process-oriented, trying to promote more efficiency in business processes. And then from there, I got looped in to assist the FDA in some of their international work. So there's an international organization. It's called the International Council for Harmonization, or ICH, where regulators and industry from around the world get together to help develop internationally harmonized guidelines for the development of medicine. So, for example, various requirements around clinical trial conduct, as well as manufacturing requirements. And so the goal with this work is to help promote more efficient patient access to medicines globally. A few decades ago, you have a situation where a company would bring their product to market in the US or Europe, and then maybe a few years later, once they get approval, they might take it to Japan. And this sort of slow rollout was resulting in a situation called drug lag, where innovative medicines would become available in some countries much more quickly than other countries. And so ICH has really tried to help promote global drug development so that you can do one clinical trial and have it meet the requirements of countries around the world. So this was primarily my portfolio at at the US FDA. And my portfolio at Pharma is actually very similar. I've just sort of transitioned from the government side over to the private sector. So that's very much what I still focus on. I'll say, again, that my views today are also my own and do not necessarily represent my association's views, but much of our work is really focused on promoting or advocating for policies that help promote companies' ability to develop medicines efficiently, bring them to market quickly, help promote use of innovative approaches, and also to increase patient access to medicines globally. So I'll stop there. It's a little bit about me and my career path. And Denise, I'll turn it back to you. Thanks.
My head, just listening to the differences between all of what you all do is just mind-blowing and fascinating. So I'm going to pause and open this up to questions for all of you. This is a really great chance, whether you have a question for a specific panelist, whether you have a question for all of them, or a couple of them regarding their career path, their current work. Ready for questions. Great. We have one question that came in on the chat, and this is, looking back at your academic journeys, are there particular classes or lessons that continue to influence how you approach advocacy? I am sure all of you've got some insights on that.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I actually really appreciate it because it makes me have to reflect back. But I absolutely loved policy analysis and I still use it to this day. I tend to do, I prefer the memo format. And it's because that was how I learned how to do policy analysis at GW. And so that was a class that I would say certainly has helped me throughout my career also because it allows you to know how to define a policy, right? Like what is the problem or what is the question this policy is seeking to answer? And then it goes all the way to your recommendations, which is like the fun part to me. So I would definitely say that that class is very, very helpful. And I also did a couple of international development classes as well that were really helpful. And those were helpful because, you know, when you're thinking about policy and systems that don't quite mirror the US system, then it allows you to think outside of the box and in creative ways. And it also makes you measure success at different points rather than, you know, say a piece of legislation passed or, you know, I remember one of my professors saying, and I think it was Dr. Brinkerhoff or something, she said something like, you know, you don't measure success by saying that you were able to get funding for a faucet to start running water. You're successful when you're even able to get the government to dedicate funds, or like when you're digging for the pipes or you're laying pipes. Those are points of success. And so those two classes have really like stayed with me throughout my career and have really helped just sort of frame policy and frame an approach to it. So thanks for that question.
Very interesting. Who else would like to contribute to that?
I'll jump in here. I took a lot of economic development courses when I was at GW, and one of them I had an opportunity to take was it was a short-term study abroad, and it was on Rwanda. I don't know if they still offer the course, but if they do, I highly recommend. And I think this might be outside of the Trachtenberg School. So apologies, Denise, for promoting this, but essentially, we studied economic
I'm going to
development.
interrupt you for a second, Amanda. That's actually a great thing, and always feel free. We love that about our school, that things are open outside the Trachtenberg. So please, that's great. And anybody else, that's wonderful. Never need to apologize for that. So that's great. Keep going.
Thanks. So we had an opportunity to study economic development in Rwanda, and we learned how there were a lot of sort of private as well as public partnerships going on with different initiatives. And one that stuck out to me was an initiative by Kate Spade, who was working with some of the kind of local basket weavers to develop products and also handbags that could be kind of developed in a way where Kate Spade could sell these, as part of their product line. And to me, it was just a really great way to kind of see how these partnerships can provide value to local communities. Personally, I work with stakeholders all over the world, and I think that exposure really helped kind of prepare me for, the environment where now I'm working with people from, all over the place. The other thing I will emphasize is I think, the analytics, the econometrics, all of that is really helpful and it will support you. But I think one of the most important things is having a robust writing skill set, being able to write persuasively and compelling and concisely, like get your arguments out there. So I know I took a lot of, there's a lot of writing when I was at Trachtenberg. So, I just really can't underscore enough how valuable those skills are.
Yes.
The other class I'll add, just from the perspective of working at a foundation, now that I still use, is the program evaluation courses. We, in our grant making that we do, evaluation is a key component of that. So if I think, I think program evaluation is relevant probably in any of the fields you all are looking towards. But if you're interested in foundations and philanthropy, I found that to be a huge plus that's helped me over the years, understand the basics, ask good questions, things like that.
That's a really good segue to what I wanted to talk about. Definitely the policy analysis. I think for very obvious reasons as were described, but taking classes on the fundraising side, nonprofit governance is incredibly helpful. I knew that's where I wanted to be, and having that understanding of what we need to keep funding, how to communicate about our advocacy, to show the value of what I'm doing and the team is doing every day, is incredibly valuable. And then understanding how that fundraising side works so that I can support direct engagement with donors, know what grant makers are out there, and kind of bridge those different aspects of the work. I highly recommend taking classes on the fundraising side and having a general understanding of nonprofit governance. And I believe there was also, I forget what it was called, but I want to say it was leadership, which kind of talked about how you can be a leader in the nonprofit space and in public service. And having that kind of leadership mindset is also very helpful to kind of inform the work, show the value of advocacy. I think it's difficult doing advocacy work, right, in the States, in the US, et cetera. Oftentimes, it just doesn't work. There's like, you can do everything, try everything, but, ultimately something still goes through and there's a lot of chance associated with it. But being able to kind of describe what you're doing, why you're doing, and showing the value of that for a leadership team is very valuable, and I think it can help get you far.
Terrific. We had a question that came in, and then I'll get to Jade to ask a question. Maybe the question came in before Jade raised her hand. Someone wants to know, how would you say your MPP specifically informed your advocacy career paths?
I'll just jump in again. I came to DC actually wanting to go to law school and had a couple of interviews and was waitlisted at some law schools. And every interview I had, I talked about how I wanted to work in government. And eventually somebody was like, Have you ever thought about a public policy degree rather than law school? Like you're going to be paying thousands of dollars, but what you really want to achieve is like policy engagement and advocacy. And so I started my classes at GW, and at that time I was interning for a lobbying firm, and eventually I actually was working on the Hill full time. And my MPP degree was like just pivotal, like, especially now, and if you want to even think about just advancing, say, from like an analyst position into directing departments and divisions, like having that MPP does sort of set you apart, and it does offer valuable experience. And one thing that I really enjoyed about the MPP at Trachtenberg School was that they offer some of our capstones were done with organizations, or you got to intern. They organize internships. We also had classes with like alumni or other professionals who were outside of academia who came in and really shared their experience. And one exercise that we did during the MPP program was like finding a resume of somebody that you really admired and asking yourself whether you had taken classes or you had gained some skills that could help you attain that position. So my MPP degree really informed my career path, and it really also just really set me on the path, which is where I really wanted to go. And so I think if you have an interest in advocacy and policy, which I'm pretty sure that's why you're all getting this degree, I will say that, your MPP is going to be very valuable for those specific classes, but also just for giving you a perspective about the field and the arena, and just how to advance your career that matches the values that you hold as well.
Anyone adding to this one?
For me, getting the MPP was really about career advancement. I actually did the MPP part-time while I was working full-time at the US FDA. And, just looking around me, I saw a lot of people with PhDs, with MDs, with, JDs, and it became very apparent to me that if I was going to continue to advance in my career, I was going to need some sort of an advanced degree. And, I have to say, I'm not sure if I would have gotten the position I have now, after I left FDA, if I would have, gotten that without an advanced degree, or even if they would have paid me at the level that they're paying it me. So, for me, it was about career advancement, but I will say, I think it was also the skill set that came with it. It really equipped me with a lot of tools to do my job more effectively.
That's great. Jade, we'll pivot over to you, and then I've got some more questions in the chat we'll go to.
Yeah. So as someone who has been out of grad school for almost 2 years now, and was with the DC mayor's office, and then most recently I was with HUD, but unfortunately got impacted by the stuff. I had my MPA and also my nonprofit management graduate certificate, and really went into school for like gender-based violence advocacy work, but I've just found so many intersections at social policy that I'm so interested in. What I guess would be your best advice of like kind of how to not only address the job search and maybe titles, not only in this market, but in general, as someone who's kind of has that interest in that background, but might be coming from more of a policy or like management analyst side of things. Just because I feel it's one thing to go into government, but I feel like hopping over has been a little difficult for me. I'm kind of looking at more like policy analyst or like advocacy things. But just any advice you guys would have on like maybe job titles, organizations, or kind of like what steps you would take to like pivot, if anyone has any advice on that.
You
Go
ready?
ahead, John.
Yeah, I'll a couple of things on this. One, I think it's really valuable. Something that pretty much everyone is looking for in an advocacy position, in a policy position at a nonprofit, is having government experience, in particular, diverse government experience. So I think you have a big step ahead there, and I think that's fantastic. And the challenge of titles is really I mean, I don't even know what the heck my title means. Senior policy and advocacy expert. I don't know what the heck that means. And my policy analyst title was a lot of advocacy work. So you really never know. So how do you handle that? I mean, I'm sure you know this, but having conversations, going to your network, I think is really the biggest thing. I've always avoided just kind of throwing an application out there without knowing someone, having a connection, doing things to support that. And if I'm applying to a position, I'm very cognizant of kind of having a really deep understanding about the organization. I really caution against just throwing your application out everywhere, which I think is an inclination that you can have when you're in that difficult position of needing a job, being out of a job. I think quality over quantity is huge. Using your network to get introductions to people. I think most of the time people are willing, if they can make time somewhere in there, to have even just an informational conversation. So I think that's the biggest thing. And then of course you can always search in a job description for hints about, what type of position and what type of person that they're looking for. But if you can actually have a conversation about it, I think that's huge. And then, types of skills. I think it's a lot of it is about your network, but something that really stood out to me is I was talking to a colleague and they said, I came to the Internet Society and I hadn't really done internet policy before, but they asked me about it and I forget what exact policy area, but it was something probably even more complicated. And I think there's a lot of skills that are just translational skills that if you have that and you're a good communicator and you know how to build out your network, it doesn't really matter whether or not you're already in the field and doing that specific line of work because you've already shown that you can do that. So basically, if you can reflect that you have really good translational skills, you can translate policy and actually tell people why it matters. If you can build up a good network, which I'm sure you already have, that's a lot more important than a lot of the kind of nitty gritty.
I definitely agree with everything that John shared. And Jade, I'm curious, are you looking for jobs in DC or are you looking outside of the DC area? Because, I mean, honestly, for me, when I left DC, I was really only looking in Colorado for jobs. So, and it's obviously a little bit different, I think, outside of the DC metro area in terms of the organizations and how many different options there are. So like if you're looking out at like, and that maybe in DC too, but if you're looking outside, like I just found a list of like 15 or 20 organizations I thought I'd be interested in working at that maybe aligned with like my values and maybe do some of the work that I have like an overlap with. And I like literally when I was looking for jobs would like click on their like job part of their website every day to see if they were like hiring. I would try to do I was back in Colorado for a little bit before I moved back from DC and would try to go to like events, to connect with people and learn more about the organization. And yeah, I mean, and I'm sorry that this is the position that you're in, and I'm really hopeful you're able to find something that matches up with, what you're interested in and your skill set. I know it's really tough right now, but I'll be thinking about you for sure.
Thank you both so much.
And just to dovetail off of that and to incorporate some of the question in the chat that asks for what advice we have for policy generalists to get into some of these fields, I think two things. So for Jade, I agree with everything that everyone has also shared, but I will say that you should tailor your resume to highlight more of like your research skills, your analytical skills. If you're looking to get like not be sort of rubber stamped as like, coming straight from HUD as only having housing policy experience. So you would want to make sure that your resume is highlighting those like strong analytical, strong writing skills, strong research skills that can be applied and ability to navigate government systems and, get fast-paced environments, complex information into, understandable language for a general audience, those sorts of things, communication, like, the ways that people like hire MPPs or public policy or policy and advocacy professionals for in order to help them navigate the complex complex government processes. So I would just sort of like put those at the forefront of your resume and have that be what people see first. And then the same goes for being a policy generalist. I will say that, like, at the very beginning of your career, at least in my experience, you sort of, I took on a portfolio of issues that were assigned to me. And as you're gaining that expertise, you sort of want to be able to prove your ability to analyze and research issues, right? Without being really specific. But I also tried very early on to identify one that resonated very closely to me and my values, and that I wanted to carry me through my entire career. And so even though I've had experiences or jobs where I've had to work on different issues, I've always maintained health as my area of expertise, I would say, or one issue area that has followed me throughout my career, and which is now where I focus most of all of my job is now really health policy, even though it's always so interesting because children's health issues are like almost everything as young as they are, they it touches everything. So I would say that, like, highlighting those general skills is really important when you're sort of early to mid-career and you want to take on a portfolio of issues that will allow you to hone those skills and to practice and have discipline within those skills. But I will say, like, try to identify one that you want to become an expert in, and that you think of that one as where, sort of think about it as what career trajectory you want to have and what you want to ultimately say you want to hold as your, ultimate position, and what is that area of expertise. And it is important to sort of identify that early on and to see if you can sort of tailor your career around environments where you can continue to practice in that issue area. And if you're in a situation where there's, a bunch of issues that you have to take on, that you can still say, hey, I also would really like to be in this practice. I would really like to be have an experience with this issue. Sorry, I rambled a little bit there, but I hope I got the point across.
You hit on a couple really good points with that. Do other people have, because we started to veer into the question, which I think is really great, that one about the person asked about a lot of these fields being very technical, and what would you suggest for a policy generalist to get into some of those fields? You started to hit on that. Do other people have some insight specifically for that question? It's a tough one.
I can add one thing. I think what's already been said is very helpful. In the application process specifically is where I think you have to really highlight, I want to be at this organization, want to be working on this topic. If I'm looking at resumes and you've only worked in other areas and I don't really see a deep expertise in that topic, I might discard it unless you address that. And it's definitely achievable. If you lead in and you talk about why you're interested in the field, why you have a passion for it, and then you use your existing work to support that and show how that would translate, that's huge. I think that opens the door. I think that you can get an interview from that. And like I previously said, at my organization, some people have zero background in the work that we did, or kind of tangential background, but they have very key skills that we're looking for, and they quickly learn. And those are things that we're looking for in the application process. Do you have skills that translate, and why are you interested and passionate about transitioning into a certain field?
Mm, that's great. Along those lines, another question that came in is, what titles should any suggestions for early to mid-career search? And I think this is a tough question because titles can be all over the place, depending on agencies. But if people want to hit onto that question, as well as another question that came in, we'll tackle next. Actually, let me just go to a clarification someone had about something you just said, John, and Jade, this is something I can chime in also with this is, with what you're saying, John, the question is, would you put that into a cover letter or at the summary of a resume to make sure that it gets through that screen? And then we'll get to the other two questions.
Yeah, I'm mainly talking about the cover letter there, right? I think cover letter is very important. And then if you get the actual interview, again, raising that, showing it in the interview. So cover letter, interview.
And I would also add, sometimes you have to make sure it's somewhere in the summary or in there, because otherwise they might not even look at your cover letter. And of course, I'm going to say it's why you have to leverage networks. So someone's actually willing to pull the resume, read it, and see why you're making that pivot. So we have, so any points on job title suggestions before we go to the final question and then open up into the breakout rooms?
I can jump in here, Denise. My suggestion there is really to be open-minded. I have to say, I never would have thought I would have landed in the career that I am in now, and I just sort of kept my eyes open for opportunities and took them as they came. So try to be open-minded. It can be a little bit tricky. So I've worked in both government and industry, and it's very different. For example, in government, I think one of my introductory roles, it was the analyst title, and the director titles were very senior. However, when I got to industry, director is not a very senior title. You start getting into the vice presidents and the senior vice presidents and the executive vice presidents. So it's very different when you go from government to industry. If you're looking at job listings, look at the expertise that's required, and that's a good way to find out if it's the right fit for you. And as John mentioned, leverage your network, try to talk to people. I personally don't know if I've ever gotten a job just sort of cold submitting a resume. I've heard that it's happened to people, but I've not had luck personally. I think relying on your network, even I know at one point in time, I was reaching out to GW alumni that I had never talked to before, just trying to, find ways to expand my network, to learn more about what opportunities are out there. And I know Denise is a great resource as well, providing career advising. So tap into everything that's out there. And I sort of encourage you to kind of keep your mind open and be flexible, because you might end up somewhere that you never thought you would have, and you might find it's better than you could have imagined.
Great. Oop, Allison.
I was just going to kind of build on what I was sharing in the last question too, that I think especially at nonprofits and foundations, the policy work isn't always called like a policy associate or a director of policy. Sometimes it's in communications or government affairs. So I really agreed that, kind of like looking at positions broadly and like seeing if policy is a part of the job description. And definitely everything else has been shared too around like networking and things like that. And the other thing I'll just share, and I love like all of your all's like present day thoughts on this too, is my husband is hiring for a position right now, and in their job description they ask people to apply like through an email address, and then they also posted it on LinkedIn, and a bunch of people applied through LinkedIn. And so my husband, I was trying to push back on this a little bit, because I was like, you should be open-minded, and he's like, well, people aren't following the directions of the job description, like I'm not sure I want to look at the LinkedIn job people who applied. So I don't know, I would also say like, look at those directions closely, because you might have like a stickler like my husband who's like, if they can't follow the directions in the job description, like I don't want to bring them in. So I know that sounds like very elder millennial, but I'll just put that out there too.
I think that's in this day and age, Allison, I think that's how people are saying that we're being inundated by resumes. There's some level of screening, right? If someone doesn't follow directions, what is that kind of employee that they're gonna be? So I'm with your husband on that. We're gonna there's one final question. It's kind of a heavy, big question. So hopefully we can cover it. And then I do want to open up in a breakout room. So hopefully we can answer this as succinctly as possible, which is a lot. When he hears the word advocacy, two potential work streams come to mind: raising public consciousness or influencing opinion through campaign building and mass communication, and interfacing directly with decision makers and other influential stakeholders. Can you speak to how these roles have, in your career have involved one or the other or both? So we'll take this as the final question for opening the breakout rooms. It's a really substantive question. So whoever wants to go for this one first.
Agree, this is a big question. I'm happy to talk about it more in the breakout. I'll just say my role is unique in that I'm the only person who really does policy and advocacy at our organization. So right now I do both. I engage advocates. I also do direct lobbying of elected officials. So I think that it really depends on, your career trajectory, the position that you have, the organization you work for. Because I know, some of the policy organizations I work with on a day-to-day basis, they have like 15 people and they're all doing different types of policy work. And they have a director of advocacy who only does advocacy. So, yeah, I think that it's a great question and one that is, big answer.
I definitely think that there is an intersection though with both of those streams. And I think that it's really all about which audience you're speaking to or what product you're putting out for what audience. At times, and advocacy is a newer term. I'm used to like government relations or, government affairs and or just being a lobbyist, even though, that carries its own connotation about whether you're registered or not. Are you talking directly to lawmakers? But at the end of the day, you're still raising consciousness. At times, you're writing to influence opinion, influence a vote. You are writing to also influence your organization to take a position or a stance. And at times, that then translates into what that means for the stakeholders or whether it's elected officials or whether it's, community partners and things like that. So I think there is definitely intersection throughout advocacy careers. And, in my line of work, we say advocacy because our main stakeholders are children. They're not able to, vote for themselves. So we advocate for them. And our members are our advocates because they are speaking for their patients who are minors or children who are not eligible for participation via vote in the political process. So I would say that, I think that a career in policy and advocacy, government relations affords you an ability to do like a whole host of things. I will say that it is one of the most rewarding things that you can do, even if it feels like, you're early in your career, you're, sort of just like monitoring legislation through the process. It all adds up and it's part of something that is impacting people's lives. And, policy is about trying to do the most good for the greatest amount of people. And so I think this career path is one that would encapsulates both of those streams and one that has great, great value.
Anyone else to add to this before we open up into the breakout rooms? And you could certainly address this in the breakout rooms. I always find this panel so interesting. I feel it's interesting and I just feel inspired. I'm just truly in awe of the work of our alumni, and I just really appreciate each of you work in such different areas, issue areas, and the work that you do. So I just really want to thank you for taking the time for educating all of us today. I know my understanding has expanded very much from hearing all of you, which enables me to do my work well. So I thank you all very much. I'm going to